I'm completely exhausted, and it's 9:43 p.m., which means it's time to sit down and write another script. The bullet points are ready, the topic is ready. Today's topic is word structure and logic, which is probably the worst possible thing to start writing about after dealing with sick kids, an exhausting 8-hour day in the office, and another hour and a half spent commuting. So the question is simple. How much of this can a person actually take? Because right now, my eyes are literally closing. But life isn't particularly merciful, not to me, and not either to you. So I'm sitting down at the computer anyway, to deliver what I actually want to deliver. A piece of the history of my world and another package of mechanics that I will try to explain before my brain shuts down completely. Alright, let's begin. If I'm bold enough to call this game a Souls-like, then the next thing I should talk about is how bosses actually work, why I made that decision, and what my bosses really have in common with bosses in Souls-like games. The first thing is simple. Every boss in the game has two phases. There are 12 bosses in total. Right now, 4 of them are finished. The rest are still work in progress. But more importantly, they prove something. That I am staying loyal to the system I designed for myself. A system I deliberately put around my own neck like a leash. God, it's so late. I'm not even sure where to start. Alright, let's start with the most boring part. I mentioned 12 bosses. Each one is a gate that must be defeated at a specific point in the game. Character levels 4, 6, 8 and 10. If it were technically possible, I would install some kind of trigger inside every copy of the game to enforce that. But obviously, that's not how board games work. Every boss in the game is designed to fulfill several functions, starting with the most obvious one, 2 phases of the fight. When the party brings the boss down to about 60% of health, the first boss of the red faction, Lihar, becomes even more aggressive and even faster. Each boss also has a unique ability of their own. Of course, within the limits of the mechanics my system actually allows me to build. And yes, sorry, this won't be the Nameless King or Malenia, but it should still be interesting. Why design it this way? Honestly, I wanted players to feel a slight sense of hopelessness. Like when a damned manager is standing over your shoulder reminding you about a deadline. And the closer the deadline gets, the more annoying he becomes. That's the feeling I wanted to translate into combat. Souls-like pressure, but on hexes. But the fight itself is only one part of it. There are no shortcuts. If you don't defeat the boss, you don't move forward. Simple. The boss acts as a gatekeeper, and to avoid offending anyone, think of a niche Reddit community, guarding the purity of its values and traditions. That's basically what the boss is doing. Defeating him is the condition for moving forward. Every boss after Lihar is stronger, so trust me, you don't want to face the next boss without defeating him first. You will simply be too weak to survive what comes next. Ironically, bosses weren't even the first thing in my original blueprint. They were somewhere further down the list. But I got so fixated on explaining how Souls-like they are that I completely drifted off the topic. It's 10 p.m. now, I'm calling it a day. I will come back to this tomorrow.
Much later.
So let's move to the real question. How do players actually reach those bosses? That transition wasn't too bad actually. Bosses, and now the mechanics that lead to them. In the previous video, I briefly talked about exploration in the world of Absent Age. The more I looked at the world map I designed, the more one thing became obvious. This system simply wouldn't work. Originally, I imagined something closer to a single large board like in Talisman of Might and Magic or even Monopoly. But when I looked at the number of spaces I created and the way I distribute locations across the map, I realized something important. Any further iteration of that design simply didn't make sense. At that point it became clear. The world map needed a completely different approach, because a board game map is not geography, it's pacing. And that's when the idea appeared. Chance cards as the map. Instead of moving pieces around a large board, tokens would exist only for tactical combat on the Hex battlefield. The cards themselves would replace everything the world map was supposed to do. So how does that work in Absent Age? At the start of each turn, the player who begins the round draws 2 event cards and places them face up on the table. Players then choose between them. For example, a fight against X plus 1 enemies, where X equals the number of players, or a random world event. This card map system removes the empty, boring spaces that used to exist on the board, the problem I mentioned in the previous video. During the first stage of the journey through the world of Absent Age, before the first boss tests your understanding of the system, players draw 2 event cards and place them on the table. As a team, you decide which one to resolve first. And let's take one of my favorite cards as an example, Rain and Rust, and compare it to a combat card. Right in the first turn, you face a decision. Do you jump straight into combat? Or do you accept the rain, which causes rust to form on your armor, reducing your armor value by 1? It's a simple mechanic, not even particularly realistic. But what happens if after that fight another environmental event appears? And this time you have no choice. You must accept the penalty just to keep moving forward. That's where the tension comes from. Each new card introduces another threat, but the responsibility for how you react to that threat rests entirely on the players. You have limited control over the brutality of the world. And once again, it's about consequences. The decisions you make early stay with you later in the game. In later stages of the campaign, after defeating bosses, the system expands, eventually allowing up to 4 cards to be active on the table at the same time. Continuing the topic of negative affixes, this is a good moment to talk about maps and hex biomes. There are 4 biomes where campaigns can take place. Each biome has its own unique affix, something that weakens the player's combat effectiveness. Once again, this follows my design philosophy. This must hurt. Every map needs a built-in flaw that makes combat harder. Let me explain the system using the winter map as an example. Also, on a personal note, I like winter and snow, so this is probably my favorite map. The creatures living in that region include things like winter spirits, cultists tied to local sects, and similar enemies. The rule for the winter map is very simple. You receive -1 to armor and magic resistance. That's it. On paper, it doesn't look like much. But when you translate that into how attributes scale, how item values work, and how character progression develops, you realize something important. You effectively don't have 1 point of armor until you reach +2, because the map immediately cancels 1 point of both armor and magic resistance. Now combine that with the special debuff used by winter enemies, Frostbite. At that point, even a value of 2 can effectively behave like 0. When you add a specific campaign faction on top of that, the winter map becomes extremely punishing. The other maps are still being tested. For example, the city biome uses a special mechanic called Madness. Right now I'm testing 2 possible directions for that system. The first version treats Madness as an additional dice test. Every unit on the map must perform an extra d6 roll. That roll can either completely cancel the attack or reduce it to a weakened version. Only a full success allows the attack to work normally. The second option is a simpler design, a direct reduction of stats combined with a special ability used by city enemies, which, similar to Frostbite on the winter map, pushes players into a spiral of weakening effects. And this wonderful way we arrive at the next topic: stamina in combat. Actually, maybe the madness mechanic should come from enemies themselves, not the map, and reduce combat effectiveness that way. I literally just thought of that. Hold on, that idea is going straight into my spreadsheet. Well, it's technically OpenOffice. But since I use Excel every day at work, anything that looks like a spreadsheet automatically becomes Excel in my head. Now, to make combat on the Hex map more constrained, players receive 2 action tokens per turn. Every action has a cost: movement, a basic attack, or a skill. The rule itself is simple. If you want to move the number of hexes allowed by your character, 1 token. If you want to perform a basic attack, another token. But if you want to use a skill, that costs 2 tokens. At least for now. I haven't had time to fully test this system yet, so I'm not claiming this will definitely be the final version. To really test it though, I need your hit roll, 2d6. Or am I slowly turning into the same merciless manager who stands behind your back and keeps reminding you about the impossible deadlines? Let me know in the comments. Right now, your feedback is basically the only QA department I can afford after hours in the corporate machine. I'm writing this while looking at 2 different worlds in front of me. My free OpenOffice spreadsheet where absent age is being born, and the corporate Excel sheet that slowly drains the life out of me. If you want to support this kind of creative guerrilla work, I'm asking for something simple: a subscription and a like. For me, that's the signal that at 10 p.m. I'm not talking to an empty wall. but to people on the other side of the screen who are also tired of safe plastic games. And if you feel this project deserves more than just a like, you will find a link to my Ko-fi page below, in USD. I'm not raising money for a yacht. Every dollar is a small piece of time redemption. A chance to buy back 1 hour of my life from the corporate machine and give it to this game, and to my wife who patiently tolerates my absence. So, will you throw your own token into this fight? I'm going back to the spreadsheet. See you in the next phase. There are still 2 topics left that I wanted to cover today, but I'm deliberately saving one of them for a separate episode dedicated entirely to that subject. This video is already X minutes long. So since we are talking about combat, take a closer look at the layout of my battle map. And before anyone starts throwing criticism at it, keep one thing in mind. This layout is not finalized yet. Changes are still very possible. This map might become larger, that's my wife's opinion, or it might become smaller, that's mine. Once again, the winter region will serve as the example. And yes, I apologize for how it looks. Applying proper artwork to this layout would have taken a lot of time, so I used the simplest solution imaginable. I literally colored the hexes with crayons. That's how the starting positions were marked. Right now, I don't have a final solution for starting positions. Who starts where and how exactly that will be decided. So there will be probably some element of randomness involved. What matters here is that you can clearly see the obstacles on the map. And this is the next element I mentioned in the previous video. Tactics. Some areas of the map create more opportunities for specific movements. Others are much more open. Because of that, players can reposition, improvise, and look for better tactical angles. This version of the map is still a very early prototype. I currently have 2 other layouts as well, each experimenting with a different approach to obstacle placement. As for the biomes, I already know that the desert map will be the most open one. And these are battlefields where you will face enemies from one of the 3 campaigns across 4 different biomes of the game. The final point when it comes to Hex Combat. Line of sight. In Absent Age, it simply doesn't exist. If a skill has a range of 4 hexes, you can use it even if there are obstacles in the way. Because honestly, a mage should be able to fire a magical projectile from between trees or from behind cover. In my game, we are not wasting time arguing whether you can see the tip of a monster's head sticking out from behind a rock. If a spell has a range of 3, it hits. But if you want to hit that monster with an axe, you have to reach it first. Simple rules, but they create difficult situations. And well, 3 evenings later. While writing this episode, I actually came up with another design solution. One of those moments when you suddenly think, wait, this might actually work? And honestly, I'm glad that while writing this script, I managed to solve another design problem. That's how Absent Age is created. In pain, somewhere between closing eyes and the silence of the house late at night. That's the reality of someone who, despite work and family responsibilities, is trying to build something more. Seeing it as the only path to freedom. Working what is basically 1.5 jobs. Where that extra half waits for the day it might finally pay off. Solving problems caused by lack of experience, limited skills, and limited equipment. But I'm not giving up. I keep fighting. One day, I want to leave the corporate world behind and work on game design and world building every single day. Earlier, I told you about the 2d6 hit roll, but the truth is, every evening I am the one rolling the dice, checking how much longer my wife can tolerate this project. The name Absent Age is not accidental. It's the age of my absence from her life, so that this system can eventually exist. If you want to help me repay the debt and buy back even a single hour of my life from the corporate machine, you will find the Time Redemption Coffee Fund link below. Every dollar means 1 minute less in the insurance office and 1 minute more for this world and for my family. Good night. I'm going back to them before they forget what I look like without the glow of a monitor on my face. See you in the next phase. Welcome to the House of Genioslav.